Good afternoon to our colleagues on the East Coast, and good morning to colleagues who are west of us. We're excited to join you today to talk about the use of LMS data in institutional research. I'm Victor Borden, Professor of Higher Education at Indiana University, and today I'm joined by two colleagues, Ben Motz, a colleague from IU in Psychological and Brain Sciences and eLearning, and Etienne Pelaprat from Unizin. The title of our session again is Incorporating LMS and Other Clickstream Data into Institutional Research. The general outline we'll follow is Etienne Pelaprat, Chief Technology Officer at Unizin, will first tell you about some of the details of LMS data. Ben Motz will share with you how these data can be used in institutional research and otherwise at your institution. And then I will at the end talk about some of the implications for these new sources of data and the new methodologies developed to analyze them at the end. Okay, I'll turn it over to Etienne now.
Thank you, Victor. It's great to be with everyone in some form or fashion. My name is Etienne Pelaprat. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Unizin, and I'm delighted to speak with you about some of the fun things we've been doing to try to help researchers use learning data culled from the learning management system to improve their experiments and practices and research. Unizin is a consortium of universities. It's a technology-driven consortium. We build a lot of software that we operate as common services in the name of helping scale digital education together. We're a growing consortium, founded a subset of the Big Ten, and we have been growing over the last few years, as have our services. Next slide, please. And one of the fundamental questions we've been asking ourselves for a number of years is, as education begins to depend more on learning technologies, as the student experience, as the instructor experience flows through software, how is the university going to leverage the data that can be generated in these systems, presumably about teaching and learning, to advance their research mission, to advance their academic mission? And the challenge sort of looks like this. And one of the main offerings, main technologies that Unizin offers its members is what it calls the Unizin Data Platform. And the role of the Unizin Data Platform is to extract data from the systems that are facilitating teaching and learning and try to organize it, clean it up, and aggregate it into a set of views and marts and warehouses that can be used to support, in this case, institutional research, but it could also be student analytics, could be a range of practices that depend on learning data. Next slide. So I want to share with you a little bit about how we think about LMS data at Unizin. Broadly speaking, when we talk about learning data and we look at the landscape of learning tools, there are really two categories of data that matter. And behavior data is the important one, but for this context, but there are sort of two general categories. One major category is what we call context data. That's going to describe objects and their relationships. And the objects in this case are objects in the learning environment: courses, modules, assignments, rubrics, outcomes, but also data that you're probably more familiar with: degrees, majors, minors. And the idea here is that you want to bring all of this data from these different systems, contextual data from these different systems together. This data is rich in description. It contains, for example, the contents of assignments, the grades. This is data that is relational in nature. It's typically generated out of the operational data stores of these learning technologies and is often suitable for batch processing. The other category of data, go back, yep. The other major category of data is behavior data. So this category of data describes discrete actions of instructors or learners or TAs or even learning tools themselves in the learning environment. This is event data. It's sometimes called clickstream data or process data. It's thin on description. It describes, that an event happened and is suitable for event and signal processing. And one of the reasons we call context data is that you typically need that category of data to be able to fully interpret behavioral data. So context data, as I described, it's going to come from lots of different systems. The learning management system, certainly. We also get data from the student information system, and then all of the learning tools that are plugged into the learning management systems, Zoom, Kaltura, a range of video discussion tools. Those are all candidates for producing context data. Context data, behind that for us, when the UDP integrates that data, it commonly models it, organizes it into a single data dictionary. That data dictionary has 70 what we call entities. These are primary concepts. A course is an entity, a module is an entity, a person is an entity. And one of the major value adds of the UDP is it pulls data in from these different systems, is that it organizes that data into a single ontology and relates data from different systems together to create a more comprehensive portrait of learners. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of our documentation. We have the data dictionary is quite large. We organize it into a taxonomy. So what you see here circled in the red is a taxonomy of the classified different areas of our data dictionary. And then within any particular category here, we're looking at course structures. You're going to get a list of the entities. So this is a way of organizing information in the data dictionary. That can help researchers understand what's available, what's being described. Next slide. And you can drill into any particular entity here and look at all of the individual data points, in this case, that describe a course offering. And this is, again, mixing data from SIS and the learning management system, and primarily bringing in data from the learning management system. You would see a similar table here for modules or assignments, the name of the assignment, the submissions by students. You would see the scores on those submissions. So lots and lots of data points culled from the learning environment. Behavioral data is event stream data, process data. What you're looking here is a single event, a representation in data of a single event. And a lot of this looks like gobbledygook because for the uninitiated, it is gobbledygook. But what this particular event says is one simple thing. A student, let's say her name was Susan, in a course posted a message to a forum. We get millions and millions and millions of these kinds of events every day from the learning management systems at our institutions. I'm referring here to a standard, a data standard on which this event data is based. Data standards are really important because if vendors produce data in a standard, the UDP can accept it as is. So there's a plug and play element that is important to expanding the breadth of data we capture and scaling our use of that data also. What kinds of behaviors are we capturing out of the learning management system that can be used for all kinds of analysis or behavioral modeling or whatever the case may be? First of all, we get a lot of navigation data, how students move across different parts of a course. When they get to the home, navigating to the home page, to the discussions page, interacting with a particular discussion. These are all navigation events. And something like 85% of the events that we see out of the learning management system tell you that a student is moving from one part of the learning management system, a course, a quiz, a module, a discussion, to another. Another major type of category event we get is interactions with media, interactions with content. And this is not just video content, it could be audio, could be other kinds of resources as well. Of course, we get a lot of assessment and assignment behaviors. When do students start, submit assignments? When do they view feedback? And then all kinds of data on what we call learning object life cycles. When are things created? When is a rubric created? When is a wiki page created? When is it edited, updated? Those kinds of life cycles of resources in the LMS. So, how does this apply to institutional research? Why should institutional research offices care about learning management system data? There's already a number of ways in which you care about student life and the academic experience, and we think that LMS data can help complement those existing analyses. So we see and have seen learning management system data complement survey instruments, self-reported data that IR offices care about to understand the student experience, the academic life of the student, with quantitative measures of student learning, quantitative measures of student learning gains that can be culled from the learning environment. Curricular analytics is another area where we think LMS data has a role to play. And the idea here is to, again, deepen the overall data available to IR and the kinds of measurements and interpretations of, let's say, course progress that IR already cares about. by bringing the, the depth of what's happening inside courses. So extending, for example, analyses of grade distributions by certain demographics from course grades to what's happening inside those courses. Are there differences, for example, in how certain segments of the student population perform on not just certain courses, but types of assignments or quizzes in those courses? There's all kinds of possibilities here about extending existing analyses by leveraging in-course data itself. And then finally, evaluation of academic programs and the kind of continuous improvement that is typical of academic programs, bringing the type of measurements of student learning in courses, rolling those up into reporting at the program or department level, extending those departments or programs' understanding of what is academically happening inside their courses, and thinking about trends in digital education that might position, that an academic program or department might react to in a particular way. So thank you for your time, and I will now hand it over to my colleague, Ben.
Thank you so much, Etienne. I've been known to refer to the UDP and the resources that Etienne's just described as being kind of like the contents of a candy store. That there's just so much richness and potential value in all the different data sources and elements that Unizin's done a really good job cataloging and also making available for these types of goals. To the extent that there's, like, I don't know, a single sweetness here, it's that these tools have value for improving student success. So I'm going to share with you one example of how we might use the data that Unizin's providing to improve the processes that we've currently got going on as it relates to facilitating student success and improving student outcomes. So what we've done previously at Indiana University is that we've got, toward improving student success, a manual institution-wide measure of student engagement. We do this relatively torturous thing to all of our faculty across the Indiana University system, where every semester we ask them to manually mark in a web application every student in their rosters with features of their engagement in their course. And you can see some examples of these features right here. So under the category of assignments, a teacher could mark any individual student as having strong performance on assignments, or perhaps not completing assignments at all, or labels as it relates to quizzes and exams and writing skills. And we're collecting this data in order to get a portrait of what students are doing in their learning environment so that we could intervene in situations where it seems like there's a potentially negative consequence happening. But it's curious that all these questions, these questions that we're exploring from the perspective of instructors' manual self-reports, are about data that might be available in Unizin. Previously, we've known that LMS activity is related to grades and performance. So these things that we're asking about, to the extent that there might be evidence of it in the LMS, in Canvas, for example, there's been tons of research that have shown that these things are relevant for student performance. So it would be absurd for me to try to summarize the full extent of research, but let me just take it from me, the click counts in the LMS, the number of actions performed on the site, and the access of learning materials, and the time spent, and the number of web sessions. These are all positively correlated with measures of achievement in those same course sites. So if we go to the next slide, there's this interesting hypothesis that emerges, and that's that student activity in the LMS might be related to student performance somehow, with a question mark. We would believe, I think intuitively, that student engagement is the factor that would determine both of them. So that something about student activity in the LMS, as measured by Unizin, and as correlated with student performance, is a measure somehow of student engagement, and that's something that could be constructively leveraged for interventions and also for design of programs for improving student success. But it's complicated because there are other potential explanatory factors that could, I don't know, create this pattern that we're observing where student activity is correlated with student performance. So for example, maybe students who sleep through class might account for it by using the LMS more. So then there's more student activity in the LMS when there's higher student performance, but it's not because of engagement, it's because of students sleeping through class. Or maybe students who are inclined toward technology just perform better than others. In general, the assumption that student engagement is the thing that creates increases in student activity and increases in student performance is a relatively vague hypothesis that merits some exploration. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm specifically referring to is a question related to construct validity. And if you're an IR person who's now learning about learning data for the first time as it relates to these kinds of activity measures, I'd be willing to bet that you're curious about these things just the same. So here we're proposing that LMS activity could potentially provide value as a measure of student engagement. And that thing, the construct validity of that measurement merits some assessment. The way that you assess construct validity is by doing a correlation. So basically just assessing whether the LMS activity is correlated with a known measure of student engagement. And that's something that we do have from this manual measure. I'm going to describe to you an analysis that we ran for the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference in 2019. And what we did was we took a whole bunch of ratings that instructors had provided in this manual rating system. And we took the ones that are related to attendance and participation in assignments and overall engagement. And we only took the ones that were negative. So basically at every individual student level, we've got some students who've received a negative engagement flag and other students who haven't. And we're looking at the flags as of the date when they were first flagged. And for each of those students, we're looking at their Canvas course sites that has a whole bunch of enrollments with a whole bunch of unique students. And within these course sites, we've got some students who are flagged and some students, we've got some enrollments that are flagged and some students that are flagged. It comes out to 10 to 15%, depending on how you slice it. And just to be clear, we're only talking about undergraduates, and we're only talking about students who are enrolled precisely once in each of these courses. Canvas course sites can be amalgamations of like labs and lectures and stuff. So we're looking at specifically one course behavior, and also we're looking at large courses too. We've excluded any courses with 10 or fewer students. Okay, so how did we do this? This is an important step because translating from the data resources that Etienne's described, the Unizin data platform, into something that can actually be analyzed requires some effort. This is effort that we've undertaken and that we continue to think about to great lengths. And I've made it publicly available. So if any of you are interested, there's an OSF link in the bottom that was basically our translation, was our query, where we took Unizin's data and turned it into features of student activity at the enrollment level. So we were interested in time on assignment pages and the average time between first access and assignment deadline. And each of these was a feature that described the student's behavior in a particular course site. So yeah, if you haven't written down the OSF link, then feel free to email me after the talk or whatever, and I'd be happy to send it to you. So yeah, one of the other things that we had to do, and this is an important point that, yeah, I think that really might be the litmus test between efforts that are successful and not, is whether an analysis is sensitive to the design of a course. So courses are not all the same, and we can't say that the amount of time that students spend on an assignment page should be equivalent between different courses, where there might be different kinds of assignments. So student engagement will differ between courses according to instructional design. So one of the things that we're exploring and continuing to explore is how we can categorize courses according to these different design elements. And the way that we've done it is kind of backwards. We've said for each of the things that we've measured, for each of these features, we can cluster courses according to the median feature within each class. So we did k-means, and through a bunch of analyses, we've settled on 6 different kinds of courses, although this changes depending on our scope of analysis. If you're interested in that script too, I'd be happy to share. Okay. This is what we found. This is the final model. And while there's a lot of bars and numbers here, I'll give you a brief orientation, then point out some specific learnings. So we did 6 clusters. So those are the 6 different columns that you see there. And we've got diagnostics of the models kind of in the bottom there. So the R squared and the chi-squared, the contrast with the empty model. Our first observation, if you could click one time, Vic, was that not all kinds of courses have significant relationships with Canvas activity and student engagement. So skepticism that there might not be perfect construct validity between students' activity in a course and their student engagement is merited. There are some courses that just don't have very much Canvas activity. If it's a pottery course or if it's a volleyball course or something, it would make sense that maybe there would be some stuff in Canvas, but not a bunch. So yeah, there are courses that we can identify that have poor correlations between measures of engagement and what's going on in Canvas. But if you go to the next click, there are some features that are super diagnostic. Specifically, the number of submissions and also the number of sessions are highly predictive of whether an instructor would flag a student in that enrollment. And then additionally, there are some features that vary in their relationship between activity engagement. So for example, if you're visiting an assignment page after the deadline, that row that's marked total visits to assignment pages after the deadline, in some cases, that is indicative of constructive student engagement. It means that the student is reflecting on their past work. And in other cases, it means that a student is submitting their work after the deadline, which is bad. So yeah, there has to be some attention to these differences between course designs. So given that one of the most predictive features is students turning in assignments, we've made a huge effort over the past couple of years to try and develop tools to support students actually complying with these assignments, because we found them to be the most predictive of student engagement and also, not surprisingly, downstream grade outcomes. So in a large-scale collaboration between instructional designers and researchers and IT, we've built a mobile app called Boost, which has now been commercialized and is external to Indiana University. And if you were interested, you could look at it. And the basic idea is that students are self-evidently having trouble keeping up with their online coursework. And what Boost does is it sends mobile alerts for approaching deadlines that are missing submissions. And it also sends motivational messages and custom to-do lists and other just-in-time notifications as an effort at trying to solve that one coefficient value, to try and make it so that, to the extent that student engagement is something we want to improve, that the number of assignments is something that we could actually boost by having students use this mobile app. Okay, and additionally, that example provides evidence that if we're going to tackle these, there really needs to be a large collaborative effort. So beyond this low-hanging fruit of assignment submission, things do get kind of complicated and need to be sensitive to the different kinds of courses and bring in lots of stakeholders. So the analysis and discovery of these different patterns really does require new skills for us all. And also the development of and improvement of these different features requires collaboration and involvement from lots of different stakeholders. So we've developed a Learning Data Guild, which Vic will tell us a little bit more about in his section. But I just want to articulate that throughout this use case, really to the extent that there's been positive and constructive results of it, it's been on account of this type of collaboration. So take it away, Vic.
Thank you, Ben and Etienne, for providing us a lot of great insight into what these LMS data are, how we model them, and how we use them. That's really useful. And I'm sure my colleagues have seen many things. Some of them are already involved in, and others things they know are starting to go on. So I'd like to focus my time on some of the implications on this for institutional research. Early in the experience of working with Ben and Etienne, I had come to several new understandings that kind of challenged my way of thinking from an IR perspective, and I've been doing that for about 30 years now. So there's a lot of interesting learnings to come out of this that are going to affect the way we work as institutional researchers. For one, when we use behavioral data, we get completely new types of insights. So rather than taking the kinds of demographics we use, race and ethnicity, age, income, first generation status, and so on, and correlating them with student progress and achievement, we now actually look at what did the students do and how does that correlate with achievement. We can therefore focus on promoting good behaviors and discouraging behaviors that are not as constructive. And we can do that on an individual basis rather than looking at students according to their general characteristics, labeling them, and possibly even pigeonholing them. But there's more to this connection, behavioral data with action, that fundamentally changes what we're doing, because it actually gets us to where we can't avoid the issue of what's the impact of these behaviors and how can we change them. So managerial decision-making is connected more closely with actual operations and behavior. We start to look at issues that are coming up in terms of gaps in attainment among certain groups of students. So we do still analyze the data for differences in attainment, but when we focus on changing it, we focus on the behaviors. This allows us also to consider the types of artificial intelligence applications, the nudging, the bots that we're all starting to create, and how that affects different types of students differently. So we can focus and keep in mind equity issues as we move forward. And of course, perhaps one of the strongest things about this is that it allows us to focus on how does what we're doing affect how students succeed. It connects research directly to what we do to change behaviors. On the other hand, whereas we could sit in our offices, get questions from our bosses, analyze data, produce charts, sometimes without talking to many other people, including those who gave us the task, the use of behavioral data requires far more collaboration, and we have to work with people who are coming at the same thing from different angles, and of course we do this on a regular basis, but it's a much closer relationship because we're not only working them and they're doing their role and we're doing our role, we're actually working together on the research because we both need to engage to be able to make this connection. So this has been a change for me. And the way I came about this change is that we were deciding on use cases to use for our learning guild. Ben has been pushing this, and what kind of analyses can we do as institutional researchers that use behavioral data? And what I came to realize is every time we start talking about behavioral data, there's no way you can get away from the connection to doing something about it. When we do typical retention research and we say, here are the factors: high school GPA, grades in certain courses, engagement with certain supports that predict or help students achieve and to flow through our systems and to complete and have good outcomes. Well, that was okay. And then we gave that information to people. They interpreted it and they tried to figure out what to do with it. This gets right into the crux. It says, how are students behaving in their classes and how does that behavior influence their activity? And if you're studying it and learning about it, what else can you do but think about ways to impact that behavior? So no more standing away from and above and apart from what we're studying. We have to engage very deeply with it with our colleagues. And that's changing fundamentally, or will change fundamentally, what IR is about. There are some opportunities that arise from this. For example, we IR people are allegedly take an enterprise view. We think of the whole business. We have tiers of intelligence, like Terenzini told us, and we have very broad experience with applied research, and we really know the admin records data well. That puts us in a position to contribute a lot to this. We also understand that some of the analyses we've been doing have been overinterpreted. We take correlations and people run with them as if they're causations and struggle with what to do about them. So we know we need to bring multiple methods in. We also know that regardless of what we're doing, there are folks out there creating apps like Boost, doing the work Ben and Etienne are doing and leveraging these data. And vendors are eagerly taking these data and trying to find ways to build tools that they can sell to us and that we can use. And of course, we understand these issues of dealing with vendors and all. But most importantly, we can't just say, oh, well, we can do everything in-house, we can do everything with vendors. It's a new world where we have to work together and collaboratively. So and sometimes our institutions don't make that very easy because of silos and things like that. And the other part of this is when faculty and staff and administrators start getting data on how behaviors relate to success, the stuff we do with correlations between gender and race, ethnicity, and progress, and high school GPA and ethnicity and income and so on, become less useful. They don't really have keys to action within them like this kind of analysis does. So what do we do? Well, for one, we have to develop strategies to better use these data and to collaborate with our colleagues to do so. And as Ben mentioned, we set up an eLearning data guild at our institution where we brought together folks engaged in institutional research, the people in our online education office, those who deal with teaching and learning assessments, Center of Teaching and Learning folks, and the IT staff who support all these, to talk about what is this stuff and how do we use it. And it's a very revealing talk. For example, it reveals that what we thought were very mature data governance policies and practices at our institution don't actually cover these data because they have very different issues of privacy. And we can't simply create a census file and let people have at it without considering these repercussions and what it means to be able to look at the behaviors of our individual students and our individual staff. So therefore, we've used this idea of use cases. How do we come up with ideas for using these data and move forward so that through the use of these data, we learn about how to use them effectively? And then finally, the one thing I see coming out of this is that institutions are going to move, shall we say, away from traditional institutional research and toward a more strategic institutional research and development capacity. And that is, we have key issues with moving very quickly to using more technology throughout our educational processes and programs. And we need to bring together the resources at an institution to do that sort of in the trenches research on how these behaviors relate to success, to identify key strategies and priorities for improving that. And part of this is the notion that we're not trying to fix the students, we're actually trying to fix ourselves to work better with the students. And yes, of course, we won't get away from providing student support and all of that, but we have to do so in a way that allows us to understand student behavior and its relationship to how they learn in our classes and how they progress through our institutions and the quality of their learning experience. So that is the substance of our presentation, and we will engage with you in a live Q&A of some form, which you will learn about during the session. And if you need to contact any of us at any time about this, here are our email addresses. They're readily available by Googling us as well. And we're looking forward to hearing your comments, your questions, and your concerns. Thank you very much for your time.